Shalom, Eliyah Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Peace be unto thee, for the kingdom of heaven has come near unto thee. Working. I hope to provide through the scriptures a rightly dividing understanding of this subject. Adonai does want us to do his work and be diligent in that, as he was himself. Luke 2:49. Many are careful and troubled about many things, doing this, that, and other things, and forgetting about the needful thing, which is to draw near to Yeshua and listen to his word. Luke 10:38-42. John 6:27. The message of this study is that we are to work for Elohim and do his labor. We're to labor for things that endure. The main focus of our life is supposed to be for witnessing the work of the ministry. All other labors we do are to be merely supplemental to that, not instead of it. Labor not for the meat that perisheth is supposed to mean something. John 4:34-38. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and finish his work. Here is the meat that endures. Notice in verse 38, other men labored, and ye are entered into their labors. By being his witness, we're entering into the labors of the prophets of Yeshua and of the early brothers. We are able to partake with them in this work to call people to Elohim. The following are some verses that speak of the types of work we should mainly be doing. 1. First, the labor of spreading the gospel. Matthew 9:37-38. 1 Corinthians 3:8-9. 1 Corinthians 9:1. 1 Corinthians 15:58. 1 Corinthians 16:10. Philippians 4:3. 1 Thessalonians 3:2. 2 Timothy 4:5. 2. Second, the work of searching the scriptures. 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18. 2 Timothy 2:15. Third, working out our salvation. Philippians 2:12. 2 Corinthians 5:9. James 1:25. Fourth, works of miracles. John 9:4. See 4-7 for context. 5. Fifth, the labor of love, serving others. Hebrews 6:10. Romans 16:6. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Searching through the New Testament, we find over 140 verses which speak specifically about these kinds of spiritual works and labors. The main focus is the spreading of the gospel, so much so that in some places preaching is simply called the work. Acts 13:2, Acts 14:26, Acts 15:38. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all end with an exhortation, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all end hyphenated, and the book of Acts begins. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all end with an exhortation from Yeshua to go into all the earth to speak the gospel to all nations. Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Mark 16, 15. Luke 24, 47. Acts 1, 8. Many who profess to be Christians err greatly in two main ways when it comes to the subject of our labor. First, they place disproportionate importance on the few verses that speak of working with our hands. And second, they interpret the phrase working with our hands to mean having a steady job for money. We hope to deal with both of these errors. First, we put below an exhaustive list of every New Testament passage that speaks of Christians working with their hands. Acts 20, 34, 35, 1 Corinthians 4, 12, Ephesians 4, 28, 1 Thessalonians 4, 11, 12. Notice the reasons that are given for working with our hands. First, to be able to live honestly and uprightly. Example, no stealing, panhandling, con jobs, selling unrighteous things, etc. Second, to minister unto our necessities, not for our lusts. And third, to have to give to those in need. To have to give to those in need. By Elohim's grace, we are able to testify that He has helped us to fulfill all three of these things without forsaking the work of the gospel. If people were willing to dwell communally as the first Christians did, see Acts 2, 44, 45, and Acts 4, 32, live by faith like Yeshua taught, and be content with food and raiment as the scriptures say, 1 Timothy 6, 8, they would see how little work of the hands is really necessary to get by, and would then understand why so little mention is made of working with the hands in the New Testament. Elohim has indeed given us grace to minister unto our necessities with our hands. Brothers and sisters make and or repair wood stoves, bicycles, clothing, tents, sleeping bags, backpacks, sandals, and other things necessary for us to continue the work of the ministry. Some may be bold enough to say that these types of labors don't count as work. But I personally would question the honesty of anyone who insinuates that the only type of working with hands that counts is that which is for money. Acts 18, 1, 3. This is the only place in the scriptures that mentions Paul working for tents. From this passage is built the doctrine that Paul's full-time occupation was tent making. It says that he was of that craft, which is probably a reference to the craft he had learned as a youth. Peter, for example, grew up learning the fishing trade. And while one cannot say that Peter never caught another fish from the beginning of Acts to the day of his death, yet certainly it was not his full-time occupation. Note that Paul was in Corinth when it mentions him working on tents with Aquila and Priscilla. We know that Paul was not supported solely by this. However, because of what he wrote later to the brothers in Corinth, 2 Corinthians 11:9. The Macedonian brothers, who themselves were in deep poverty, 2 Corinthians 8:1-2, supplied Paul his needs while he preached at Corinth. Thus, it is evident that whatever work of the hands Paul was doing, He wasn't making enough to get by in Corinth because other brothers were supplying his needs there. We also have sent supplies to brethren in other places. In Mexico, for example. Brothers and sisters have gotten together food, clothing, shoes, bicycles, and other needs, and have carried it down to the souls there. But we have never had to labor for the meat that perisheth. John 6:27. To do it. The 5 above passages, Acts 18:3, Acts 20:34 through 35, 1 Corinthians 4:12, Ephesians 4:28, 1 Thessalonians 4:11 through 12, constitute an exhaustive list of all New Testament verses that specifically speak of Christians working with their hands, in contrast to the over 140 verses that speak of the spiritual labors we are supposed to do. Note that none of them exhorts us to work for money, nor does any of them say anything about having a steady job. 2 Thessalonians 3:7 through 12. Some use this passage to say that Paul was supporting himself with tent making while he was at Thessalonica as well. However, it is recorded that Philippian brothers supplied Paul's necessities while he was at Thessalonica. Philippians 4:15-16. Paul wasn't making enough money to get by in Thessalonica. I'm getting tongue-tied because my tongue is getting tired. In Thessalonica either. Thus, there is no passage to support the notion that Paul had a full-time tent-making career. His full day working was preaching. He spent 2 days in Ephesus, for example, daily teaching the word. Acts 19:9-10. This is not to say that he never made a tent. We make our own tents too. But more so, we wish to point out that this cannot be used to support the idea that we're supposed to get a steady job and labor for the meat that perishes. For the meat that perishes. 2 Thessalonians 3:7 through 12. Verse 8 cannot be speaking of only physical work. Can we believe all Paul did at night was labor for the meat that perishes? Is that how to be a good example? Did he never witness or pray or search the scriptures to serve the saints? All these things are according to the scriptures' work. However, because of verse 9, we see it cannot be speaking only of spiritual work either, since he says, not because we have not power. Paul refers in 1 Corinthians 9:6 through 14 to the power he had as an apostle to not be involved with physical labors. So the work being spoken of here to the Thessalonians must be referring to both physical and spiritual. Paul and those with him preached and went over the scriptures with souls and did as well whatever physical service was necessary to help the church continue. It helps to bear in mind that true Christian life was and still is communal. It was never meant to be this form we see today of people who see each other a few times a week or so or less, and they go and do their own thing the rest of the time. The body of Mashiach in the New Testament was together. They lived together, worked together, etc. All have to pitch in for this kind of situation to function. Luke 10:2-3. Here is a labor that if we do as good disciples, we're worthy of our food and drink. Related to the previous passage that says, if any would not work, neither should he eat. Consider in that light 1 Timothy 5:17 and 18 as well. 1 Corinthians 9:13, 14. The priests under the law of Moses that offered sacrifice received a portion of the things they offered up. See, for example, Leviticus 7 through 10, 31 through 34. In the same way, in the New Testament, according to what Paul writes, those who preach the gospel are sustained through that work. They are worthy of their hire. Our conclusion so far is that Adonai wants us to work for him. A handful of verses speaking of working with our hands to minister unto our necessities, but the vast majority of verses are speaking of the more important spiritual labors. All other labor is to be merely supportive of that. Some people provoke Elohim to anger with the works of their hands. Jeremiah 25:7, Revelations 9:20. Thus, working with our hands is not always acceptable. Consider some limitations. 1 Timothy 5:22. We cannot partake of other men's sins. Example, help them to do more unrighteousness. We cannot lie for someone, help them sell or promote wickedness, or in any way aid the oppressors or workers of iniquity. 2 Timothy 2:4. We must be at liberty to do our Father's will. Most people must show up regularly to their job, or they won't continue there. We are not to be entangled like that. If it's his will to witness, spend the day praying, or even flee to another city. See Matthew 10:23. Let me reread that. If it's his will to witness, spend the day praying, or even flee to another city. See Matthew 10:23. We should be in a place where we can do that. Of all the people who use the example of Paul working on tents to justify their work week, I wonder how many also conform to the example of the liberty Paul had to flee overnight out of a city by being let down out of a window in a basket. Acts 9:23-25. Consider also Acts 8:1-4. 1 Timothy 6:7 through 10. People are not content with food and raiment. They work long hours to buy and keep things they don't need. We are not to make provisions for the lusts of the flesh. Romans 13:14. Matthew 6:24 through 34. Notice in verse 24, you cannot serve Elohim and Mammon. Mammon refers to riches. See Luke 16:11. People who hold steady jobs in society are serving Mammon. Example, money. They wouldn't be there if they weren't getting paid for it. They say they can witness on their job, or that the scriptures tells us to work, etc. But they would not go through all the vexation necessary. But they would not go through all the vexation necessary to become a lawyer or other if they were only going to receive a monthly salary of, say, $100. Incidentally, because of the life Elohim has given us, I would estimate that I use considerably less than that. perhaps no more than a few hundred per year. People use the phrase, working with our hands, but mean work for money and or keep a steady job. Many of those who use that phrase don't even work with their hands. They go instead for high-paying careers, since really working for one's hands is, in general, not the way to wealthy suburbia. Often we confront people with the fact that they're serving mammon. They reply, "We have bills to pay." That's when we see what is, that's when we see what it means, sorry guys, let me start again. That's when we see what it means not to take thought or ask, what shall we eat? If working a job to pay the bills is living by faith, then all the world is living by faith. And that's exactly how the nations of the world, Luke 12:29-31, gets their needs met. They serve mammon. They work their jobs, get their pay, and buy their needs. For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. Verse 31-32. If an unbeliever works for a bank, isn't he serving mammon? If he isn't, then what does the phrase serving mammon mean? And if he is serving mammon, then isn't his co-worker who professes to be a Christian serving mammon also as well? Revelation 13:16-18. We don't profess to know everything about what this mark is, but it clearly states that no one will be able to buy or sell without it. At that point, people will have to decide whether to serve the beast or live by faith. Most of those who profess to be Christians will certainly take the mark, since they are not willing to give up their high lifestyles. Matthew 11:28-30. There is a rest available for those who are weary of laboring for the meat that perishes. Let us get away from being yoked together with unbelievers. 2 Corinthians 6:14-18. And take his yoke upon us. Do his work. Working for this Antichrist society is not a blessing. It's actually a judgment. Habakkuk 2:13. Notice that this is of Yahweh. It's a judgment sent from him. What could be more vain than laboring for the meat that perishes, to keep living in order to continue laboring for the meat that perishes? That perishes? So many people are spending their lives in an effort to keep their lives going, but the promise to those who seek first his kingdom and righteousness is that what they need will be added unto them. Not lots of riches, but enough food and raiment to get by so we can keep on seeking him first. Ecclesiastes 2:26. Elohim gives this judgment to sinners. If they reject his yoke, they get this one: hard labor. A 30-year mortgage, for example, is basically a sentence. We can testify of the truth of his promises. We hold no jobs, own what we can carry, and make with our hands what we need, or trade for it, or find it, etc. We have no permanent address, solicit no funds, take zero government money, and have no one supporting us by working for the world. Yet we always have what we need. Elohim provides our needs in all sorts of ways, plus heals all our sicknesses. Eliyah Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, peace be unto thee, for the kingdom of heaven has come near unto thee. I'm watching for the Lord. I'm fully expectant he will appear in this generation's lifetime. The signs are there. Are you watching? Are you seriously watching? I'm watching. I'm watching every day, all day long, for years now.